The river Danube was one of the most important and long-lasting frontiers of the Roman Empire, from its conquest and consolidation under Augustus to the Eastern Empire that survived the fall of the West in the 5th century. The Romans came into contact with many different peoples at the Danube, but among those they most frequently clashed with was the Sarmatians, a nomadic people from the steppe who fought one of the bloodiest wars in the region during the 1st century AD. The Sarmatians were a nomadic tribal people who spoke an Iranian language and lived primarily from grazing herds and farming. They are first recorded during the 7th century BC, emerging in the Eurasian steppe east of the River Don and south of the Ural Mountains. Like other peoples in the region, such as the Scythians, they would gain a reputation as skilled horsemen, and the Sarmatians became especially famous for their use of heavily armored shock cavalry known as cataphracts. Centuries later, they would also inspire the Romans in their adoption of these troops. Like so many other cultures at the time, the Sarmatians were also split between many different tribes, such as the Roxolani and Iazyges, and were not a unified group. The early history of the Sarmatians is unfortunately very poorly understood. However, sometime around the 3rd century BC, they seem to have embarked on a great expansion to the lands westward, overwhelming the Scythians before them and becoming the dominant force in the steppe. This eventually led them into contact with Rome as they expanded into the Balkans, and the river Danube became the main frontier between them and the tribes of the steppe. However, it was not until the late 1st century BC that the Sarmatians became more aggressive towards the Romans and started launching raids into their territory south of the Danube, which the imperial army successfully defeated. Rome was far from the Sarmatians' only target, however, as they also fought against other civilizations such as the Bosporans in Crimea and the Parthians in the east during the 1st century AD, conducting raids in search of wealth and martial glory. The Roman Empire was internally very stable during the early Principate. However, the notable exception to this would be the civil wars that followed the downfall of Emperor Nero in 68 AD, as several Roman commanders vied for the imperial purple. After Nero's death, the throne was briefly seized by a Roman governor from Hispania named Servius Sulpicius Galba. During his reign, the Sarmatian tribe of the Roxolani launched a raid into Moesia during the winter of 68 AD, where they destroyed 2 cohorts of auxiliary infantry in a minor engagement. If Galba had any intention of responding to this incursion, he would never gain the opportunity, as he was overthrown in January 69 AD by Marcus Salvius Otho. Otho was, in turn, soon opposed by the Roman commander Aulus Vitellius, who marched upon Italy with the backing of a large army drawn mainly from the Rhine frontier. As civil war loomed, Rome was also distracted from foreign wars, and as a result, the Sarmatian threat to Moesia was largely ignored during this period. Emboldened by their successful raid in the previous winter, the Roxolani now gathered a large army with the intent of launching an incursion on an even greater scale. The invasion force totaled to around 9,000 cavalry, who were confident of victory and eager for plunder and battle. The Roxolani soon spread across Moesia and looted the province extensively, but in their overconfidence they also failed to adequately prepare for battle, and their army soon found itself spread thin across the area and laden with plunder. The Roman response came in the form of the 3rd Gallica Legion, which had recently arrived from its base in Syria. As usual, it was accompanied by a supporting force of auxiliaries. In sharp contrast to the Sarmatians, the Romans were well prepared and advanced upon the raiders in good order. The terrain was also still snowy and wet from the winter, which further impeded the Sarmatians, whose cavalry struggled greatly in the difficult terrain. Meanwhile, the heavy armor of their cataphracts combined with their unwieldy 2-handed lances and heavy swords wore them down further and made them easy prey for the flexible Roman infantry. The Sarmatian army was largely massacred in the open fields, while the few survivors took refuge in swampy terrain. This, however, proved to be no less fatal, as these warriors soon died from their injuries or exposure to the elements. News of this spectacular victory was unsurprisingly received well in Rome. Moesia's governor, Marcus Aponius, was awarded a triumphal statue, while the legionary commanders Aurelius Fulvus, Tetius Julianus, and Numicius Lupus also received triumphal ornaments for their roles in the campaign. Tacitus was very critical of Otho's decision to honor himself as well for the defeat of the Sarmatians. However, we should note it was normal for Roman emperors to be given credit for victories won by their generals, even if they were not at the battle in person. After this, the Romans spent the following months mainly being occupied by the civil wars of the Year of the Four Emperors, as Otho was deposed by the usurper Vitellius, who was then in turn overthrown by Vespasian in December 69 AD. At the same time, a major uprising erupted at the Rhine frontier when the Germanic tribe known as the Batavi led a revolt against the Romans. Yet the Danube would not remain quiet for long either. In 70 AD, while the Romans were still busy with the Batavian revolt, the Sarmatians launched another large raid into Moesia, which caught the empire completely by surprise. Many of the Roman outposts along the border were overrun, and to make matters worse, the governor Fonteius Agrippa was defeated and killed in battle. With no strong Roman opposition before them, the Sarmatians were able to raid with impunity, and Josephus bleakly describes how the province was stripped bare. When news of this devastation reached Vespasian, he immediately organized a counterattack under the general Rubrius Gallus. This time the Romans were well prepared for the Sarmatians, and Gallus won several victories over the invaders, inflicting devastating casualties upon them. Thus the Sarmatians were defeated and sent fleeing back over the Danube before the year was out, and Gallus quickly got to work strengthening Moesia's garrison so that the province would not be caught off guard so easily again. This finally brought an end to Sarmatian raids across the Danube, at least for the time being. Nevertheless, they would remain a persistent foe of the Romans on the Danube for centuries to come, fighting campaigns against the empire on their own or coming to the aid of Rome's enemies like the Dacians. The Sarmatians would, however, begin to gradually weaken from the 3rd century AD onward, when the arrival of the Goths contested their old dominance along the Steppe and Danube. Then, to make matters worse, the Huns invaded the region during the 4th century AD, who not only defeated the Goths in battle, but also drove the Sarmatians off before them, who became scattered across the steppe and the lands of the Roman Empire as migrants that also served in the imperial military. While they survived, however, this was a point of no return for the once mighty warrior people, as they gradually faded from history and were absorbed by the peoples around them, until only a faint echo remained of them by the 6th century. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like the video and subscribe for more content on Roman warfare, and check out the links to my other sites and ways to support the channel below.